It's not every day on the channel that we get to talk about good news, but today is one of those days with the Supreme Court ruling on Texas's extremely controversial draconic anti-abortion laws and striking them down. So that was Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstadt concerning HB2 from Texas. Now, if you don't remember this particular details, remember Wendy Davis's big attempted filibuster of these laws a couple of years ago? It was to stop these laws from going into effect. And I have to say that in the intervening time, I assumed we've lost. They're going to be able to continue those. That model will then be applied to other states. If it gets to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court actually decides to rule on it, it's likely to go in the conservative direction, with Antonin Scalia having been alive up until very recently, Justice Kennedy, which I'll return to a little bit later in the video, being fairly against abortion when it comes to his actual rulings. It seemed like we had lost. But no, down goes HB2 in a 5-3 ruling. Now, imagine if it had been 4-4, then we could have theoretically been screwed. But in this case, we win because Justice Kennedy crosses over, only having voted once before to block restrictions on abortion. And this is perhaps the most important area of the attempted New Order anti-abortion laws. And the reason is that there's a new approach that these anti-abortion groups are taking. And having the Supreme Court appear to understand what the strategy is and to say no to it is important, not just for striking down HB2, but also for attempts to pass similar laws. And so what is this new strategy? Well, the new strategy is basically, instead of just saying, okay, abortion is wrong, or abortion kills children, or whatever, the typical traditional arguments, instead what they're trying to say is, no, we don't care about the abortion part of it. What we care about is women's health and the health standards at these clinics. We just want to make sure that women are as safe and protected and healthy and as insured as possible. And so that's why we're going to pass a law that your hallways need to be a certain width, you know, so that you can, like, push gurneys past each other. Or we want to make sure that the closets are big enough so you can fit enough equipment in there. And we're going to require that the attending physicians have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. Now, why would they need that? I don't know, but it sounds like it's a protection designed to make the women safer. And that could be convincing. A lot of conservatives are obviously going to like it because they understand what the real strategy is. And some people who don't feel strongly either way are going to say, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, women should be protected. But the Supreme Court asked for evidence that this was actually beneficial to women, that these added health standards would actually provide more health for women to counteract the obvious undue burden that shutting down all of the clinics which did not meet these standards, since they were literally fucking measured to make sure that established clinics wouldn't meet the standards, and they couldn't do that. And so in advance of the case, they couldn't provide evidence that this is actually necessary. And when you consider the burden that was then placed on women, since in after the passing of these laws, many clinics shut down, and it became, for huge swaths of Texas, effectively impossible to get an abortion. You would have to travel a ridiculous distance to get one. And then when you combine that with other laws, you might have to do it multiple times to get the abortion. Then you can't actually have those restrictions in a reasonable Supreme Court, which I was not sure we had. And in many topics, we still don't. But on this one, they actually got it right. And that's important, because we're going to see more of these types of laws. By the way, HB2 was created by, or I should say masterminded, fronted by the Americans United for Life, who specifically say on their website, overturning Roe v. Wade can be accomplished through deliberate legal strategies that accumulate victories, build momentum, and restore a culture of life. That is a very fancy way of saying that we are literally trying to create a slippery slope against abortion by making a culture of life. And so that was shot down. Now, what I would like to see, in addition to continued striking down these anti-abortion laws that have cropped up over the past few years, is if you're going to say we need to do this thing that has really negative consequences, whether it's admitting privileges, meaning that women can't get abortions in huge areas of the country, if it's we want to stop voter fraud, so it doesn't matter if that means that a lot of people are going to be disenfranchised from elections, we want to drug test welfare recipients, all of it, which by the way costs a lot of money and makes a lot of money for the people running the drug testing corporations. If you're going to say these things are necessary, you have to fucking give evidence of it, especially when it's infringing on someone's rights. And if you can do that, And you should have to do that. If you can do that, then sure, then you can infringe on those rights. But you have to have the actual evidence that it's necessary. And unfortunately for the conservatives in this case, they don't actually have that evidence. And by the way, also in the other examples that I gave. So, good news coming out of the Supreme Court today. Some of the other cases were pretty good. They upheld a federal law stopping those convicted of domestic violence from owning guns, which, by the way, look at the evidence on those who've committed domestic violence and then have gone on to kill their spouse. It's compelling. And they overturned a Republican governor's corruption conviction, which, you win some, you lose some. But good news coming out of the Supreme Court. As I've always said, the Supreme Court it's impossible to overstate how important it is. And this is a great evidence of that.